What's going on, everybody? It's your host, Matt 10. Welcome to another video. This time, the FIFA 22 Operation Sports Community Sliders. Enjoy. The main thing with FIFA 22 is the introduction of hypermotion, the idea of different ball physics, a little bit more attention to the ball is the hope. We're in Title Update 3 at this point, though, and, it's safe to say that some things have changed. The game's not as attentive, as you will, as it was even in the, out of the box, as always, right? With FIFA, you pay whatever amount, $60 or whatever it is, and you may end up with a different game at some point. The main focus with the sliders, though, is ensuring that we find a base and we can build off of that base, and that's exactly what we've done here. We're in version 8 if you've been on the thread or if you followed me on Twitter, but it's not like a brand new, spectacularly different values each and every time. The concepts that we've used are always, within line of kind of the focus, and our focus is always trying to build the realism, but trying to build the logic as well, right? Positioning, pressure on the ball, pressure to perform, things that I've been harping on about since FIFA 14. And that's the focus here, with the team and with the community that we have at Operation Sports. Now, if you haven't already, make sure to head to operationsports.com, join the forums. It's a great group and an incredible brotherhood, sisterhood, incredible place to be, and top-notch quality people there. But in terms of the sliders and what we focus here, we've got a couple different sets, which I'll go into here. Okay, so the main thing is here, we've got a couple of different sets, and we've got a regular professional world-class set, legendary, ultimate, and then a harder world-class set, harder legendary, shorter halves world-class, and shorter halves legendary. I'll kind of explain the basis and kind of where we're going from there and why we chose certain values, because overall the sets aren't completely different. There's a lower part of the sliders that are pretty much identical throughout, because that's, again, the base of what we created, with the exception of some values in like first touch, control error, etc. Just a note, and when you do want to try out the sliders, just remember we test every bit of different teams and different leagues and everything like that. So, tactics, formations, they all make a difference. I see a lot of guys that use Liverpool, for example. Liverpool, their tactics are press after possession loss. They are hounding players. The width as well, the depth as well, so they have a higher line. You'll see that as well. So these are significant portions that people sometimes misunderstand or even don't consider. Is the tactics make a big difference. Also, the individual instructions make a big difference, right? So I like to use Fortuna Dusseldorf, for example, who are in the second division, and they actually use second division of the Bundesliga. They use a tactic of complete drop back, and their width is 40. Look at their depth. Their depth is 30, so they're very deep. So they get players pretty much all the way to near the keeper. But then they go in quick counters, fast build-up, forward runs. And so just remember that with sliders, that's one thing. But formations, tactics, they dominate a lot further. And that's how these sliders were built. They were built with the intent of understanding that formations and tactics dominate and the sliders complement. Another thing, I just want to go over my control settings. Now, this is me personally, right? Other people, different settings, etc. But I personally have agile dribbling off, auto clearance is off. I have a lot of values off, right? Auto shots, I don't understand why that would ever be needed. Assisted headers off as well. Jockey assisted. I used to do manual, and then it's just too much work, and I just kept it assisted. And then FIFA trainer should be off. I think by default it just turns that on for some reason. Timed finishing is off as well. Next player switch. Pass block assistance is on. Auto switching on air balls and loose balls. Clearance, I like the classic. I don't like the directional. And then into the nitty gritty, so to speak, the ground pass is all semi shot, semi cross semi. Lob pass is manual. This should be assisted for save assistance. I like the manual lob pass. I like the manual through ball as well, just because I like having that control and that possibility to really be a playmaker in a sense. But again, these are just optional, but this is what you'll see in some of the videos. Okay, so the main thing, for half length, we suggest 10 minutes to 15 minutes, but we, like I said, we've got shorter half set if you want to lower it. You can also play with these values at different settings, different minutes, etc. It's really up to you. You just have to kind of gauge on like what you feel good about, right? As always, sliders are just a base. You don't absolutely have to use 100% the values that we suggest. Game speed is on slow or normal. It's completely up to you again. Some people feel that slow operates a little weird. Animations, are kind of out of sync at times, but I haven't felt that way. I actually like it on slow. Normal is also good. I feel like normal livens the ball up a little bit more. You get a little bit more of those physics that FIFA 22 tried to create this year. And so normal works. It's just sometimes with these title updates, you always got to be aware of, which title update is the one that speeds up FIFA. And a lot of people are saying title update 3, the current one we're on as of this video, is the one that speeds things up. So, if you want to try it on slow, of course, there's other values, slider values that you can change, what we've modified to compensate for some of that extra speed that happens. Let's go ahead and get into the values here. So the user and CPU side are pretty much the same for the professional world-class set. The only difference is pass speed. So let me just go through sprint speed, 35, acceleration 50, shot error 68, pass error 58, shot speed 52, pass speed at 40 for the user. Difference is pass speed is 32 for the CPU. Injury frequency 65-25 for severity. Goalkeeper ability at 50, marking at 70, run frequency at 30, line height 45, length at 38, width at 62 for the user, and it's 60 for the CPU. Fullback positioning is at 50. Power bar for the user is at 50. Unless you play manual, you can raise this up to get a feel for it. We suggest 52, but it's definitely up to you. First touch control is at 85 for that error. So in terms of discrepancies here, the main thing, of course, is the pass speed. Pass speed at 40 compared to 32. Now, this is the same for all the sets. 40 pass speed for the user lets the user still, because the user in most cases doesn't utilize the driven pass as much, but the CPU definitely does. So that 32 may sound really low, but the CPU loves to pass. They love to dribble, pass. This is just the thing with FIFA. No matter how many times, how many things they want to modify about hypermotion or whatever it is, this is the concept of FIFA, is dribble, pass. They love it. And so because they tend to pass and they like to pass on the ground, that pass speed is always going to increase. So a 32 is going to really feel more like a 42, and if they do a driven pass, it'll be like a 52. And the goal here is we want the bodies in the way, blocking off the passing lanes as the user, want to be able to have a chance to intercept the ball, get a touch on the ball, etc. If not, they're just going to be able to pass all around, even on professional, even on world class. Eventually, you'll kind of think to yourself, you're like, this doesn't really seem realistic. And so that's why we've changed this value and created that discrepancy. After that, the other discrepancy that happens is the line length at 38 for the user, and it's at 40 for the CPU. Now, what this creates is a sense of proper meeting in the midfield, not just meeting, but overlapping. So there's always that kind of feeling that it's not just meeting and then nothing really, like there's no collisions that can happen, or there's no over pressure in certain spots. Now, the concept with that really brings in the idea of a midfield, having bodies in the way, having players move up just a little bit. At some point in time in one of our sets, we had this bigger discrepancy. We had a 5-point discrepancy. Now we've kind of narrowed that gap to a 2-point discrepancy. And it really creates that midfield look, and it allows players on both sides to create the sense of blocking a passing lane versus just having perfect positioning but not actually doing anything with that positioning. And that's why it's important that this discrepancy is created. And to balance it out, because of that discrepancy, we have the line width increase for the user and the CPU just a little bit lower than that at 60, so 6260. And this is the same for all the sets, by the way. Again, the focus here is really to balance it out because we've got the users got a little bit length lowered, so they're just a little bit more narrow in that respect. We've got to then widen it out. And what this does is actually a lot of cool things. It actually lets the CPU shoot on command. They'll shoot from obvious positions, and it lets the user as well kind of take some of that width and then bring the CPU to mark into that width and stay goal side, essentially. So it's not constantly exposed down the wings. Now, obviously, it depends on your tactics and whatnot, but we found that this definitely helps, and it also helps with the defensive line. Now, in FIFA, the defensive line definitely backs off way too much than it should. I've been saying this since the beta, and it's just, I don't think it's ever going to change. They back off a lot, and so that's just something we have to live with, and which is why some values here are pretty significant. So after talking about those discrepancies, let me talk specifically about these sets. Okay, so the main thing here is sprint speed at 35 for both. Now, sprint speed is important, and this is the same for all the sets. Sprint speed at 35 is the focus for this is really to kind of compensate for Title Update 3. Now, the whole concept, which you'll see here in the little clip, is the biggest issue with this game that we see is the jockey, the CB jockey. It's center back jockeying, shuffling. It happens everywhere. It happens at random, and all it is basically you get the ball out to the wing, and you can see the center back here just starting to basically a couple of center backs in this case where they're just shuffling and they're just jockeying essentially. They're not really doing anything. This is something that's been in FIFA. FIFA 20 had it. I don't know if 21 had it as much. I hated 21, which is, a whole nother story. But this really creates an issue with the game. It makes it very, very easy to counter and very, very easy to, because your forwards are left alone in this respect, and it just creates easy goals. Now, the number one solution is to raise sprint speed to crazy values, and we've had it at 55. It still happens. You can go even higher, unfortunately, or you can lower acceleration or different values like that. You can go, wherever you'd like. We've kept it at 35 because while it still happens at times, it's not very consistent. The whole other thing with FIFA is it's not just about the center back jockeying. With Title Update 3, we had a new villain, so to speak, which is the defensive line integrity, where the center back or the fullback starts running, like sprinting, towards their own goal when the ball is in the center or not in a place of any threat. So even just a midfielder facing them, and you'd say a forward is running, the center back or the fullback will run with them, breaching the entire integrity of the defensive line. And this is a big issue. And from a slider perspective, this made it even worse because not only did we have the center back jockey issue, now we've got the defensive line integrity issue. And so this sprint speed value is a basis on trying to find a balance of what we can do. Like, how can we make it contextual? How can we make it where it's okay that it happens in certain spots? Like, when would we want that animation to appear? So, for example, the center back jockeying, when do we want that to appear? Well, we want that to appear contextually in when the ball is basically, and not a threatening area, because we want them to basically let the forward run past them because the ball is not in a threatening area, like in the the middle of the pitch with plenty of midfielders in front and marking the player with the ball and their receivers. And that is when we do want the jockey to appear, because we want them to let the forwards to breach without breaking the defensive line. And so that's when we want the jockey to appear. But we don't want it to appear when the ball's out wide and a cross can come in and the center backs just leave the forwards alone. So, and then from the defensive line integrity issue, we want that to appear in the respect of when that ball is out wide, right? We want that ball out wide. Then we want those center backs and the fullbacks to follow the forwards or follow whoever's running into the box. And so that's why this value at 35 has kind of built that balance where we get enough of the center back jockey in contextual positions, and then we get the defensive line integrity issue in contextual positions as well. So it's been a real kind of tricky title update to work with on sliders. The guys, you know, if you are on the Operation Sports forums, there's a good debate about it. And I'll say with FIFA, you have to accept that if you're going to try to make FIFA realistic, you have to accept that you're going to have to make some sacrifices in certain respects. And the big thing here is you have to kind of I wouldn't say as far as identifying, but you have to kind of understand what stance are you going to take for yourself. Would you rather not see the center back jockeying? Would you rather not see the defensive line integrity issue? So like pick which one, because you can't have both, unfortunately. Even at 35, that's an arbitrary number. It's just what we have found has worked very well. But honestly, if you see the center back issue, okay, maybe it happens, but did it really affect play? Were you able to cross the ball in and send the ball into the forward, right? Because at the marking values and the other values that we have, there should be enough resistance that it makes it difficult for that to happen. Now, if it does happen, then, you know, at least you know where you can go with it. So again, if you see the center back jockey issue, raise sprint speed. You won't see it as much. And then if you see the defensive line integrity issue, lower sprint speed. And it's really that annoying. But I wanted to stress that importance because this is the value of 35 that we have throughout all the sets. And speaking of which, we have the acceleration at 50 throughout all the sets. Shot error at 68 for the world class sets here. And so for this one, we have it at 68 for the base set. So the professional world class set is at 68 and 68 apiece. And then pass errors at 58. And the reason for this is the pass error just really works for us. I mean, it's at a point in which the long balls still happen, but not every player can send a through ball in perfectly. And that kind of, you know, that's kind of like FIFA's approach to a lot of games. And a lot of, you know, that's just how FIFA loves to do. They love the through passes. And so, especially the CPU with that respect. And so at 58, there's a balance there in which the significant players can do that. After that, shot speed is at 52. Now, shot speed at 52 is actually really nice because it lets those slight deflections to happen more often, where not every shot is just punched back up in the air and caught. Now, that animation still happens. I call it like the volleyball set animation because the keeper loves to, you know, push it up in the air and then still somehow catch it after they've fallen down on the ground. It's a terrible animation, but it's FIFA, you know. Pass speed at 40-32, I've already talked about this. Injury at frequency and severity 65-25. This is always a work in progress. We've got great guys that are looking into this. But so far, you know, with a couple of title updates, especially title update 2, where it brought in a really aggressive CPU with, you know, slide tackling at random times, red card galore, like injuries were going to happen more often. We had this at 75, and so we dropped it to 65. And so it's been a good balance of players that walk off to players that get injured and, you know, they have to be subbed out. So solid overall with the amount that happens and then the severity. So they work hand in hand, of course. Goalkeeper ability at 50. This is, again, you know, the goalkeepers are strange in FIFA. They make incredible saves, but sometimes they make terrible saves and terrible animations. And so every time I've lowered this, we've lowered it, it ruins it. And then raising it, they get too good. So just keep it simple. We'll let the shot speed and the shot error dictate. Marking at 70. Now this is really because Title Update 3 reminded us a lot of how FIFA 21 and FIFA 20 started, where there's a little bit more statue approach to defending, where midfielders kind of stood still, defenders started to stand still. It just didn't look right, and marking had to be raised to kind of get them kind of engaged again, get them focused and get energized. And that's usually the threshold to when that starts to happen. And under that, they just seem too, just not, I would say indifferent would be the best way. And that just happened too often. It was so frustrating because, marking is just one of those values you don't want to mess around too much with, because man marking especially when it comes down to tactics and formations, teams that love to press, man press and everything like that, marking can make a big difference. They can overcommit, etc. So we really focus a lot on different formations and tactics, especially with this value. Run frequency at 30. This was a tough one to find because at 30, you'd think it's a lot more runs off the ball, etc. But with the way FIFA works is length controls a lot of that. And it's just one of those values that then you have to find the best complement. So whatever length you choose, you have to then find the best run frequency. We for a while liked run frequency at 50. A lot of the guys loved it because it felt like it created a sense of understanding the tactics, and I felt like players defended better. Could have been a placebo, but that was just how we felt at the time. But with some of the title updates, it just didn't work for too much longer, and especially with the biggest issues with the center back jockey issue, we couldn't have that too high. Now, if we lowered it too much to like 15 or even 1, it just became too much of ball to feet too often, and it resulted in a lot of tiki-taka at the top of the box, and the CPU wouldn't shoot. They'd try to find that second pass, third pass, and just, you'd always concede the same type of goals. And so that's why at 30, it's been a good balance. You'll see runs that happen to a certain point, and with the values in place here, they'll run to a certain point, pass the defensive line, realize they're offsides, restart their runs. And this happens throughout all the different tactics, whether it's fast build up with direct runs, etc. So this has been a good value to find. Line height at 45. This is a little different from us because we usually like to have a higher height, but height this year doesn't really work when you go higher, basically, and it works a little bit when you go lower. And we actually really love a low height. We tested this for a while on different values at like 0, 10, and scaled up. And in this respect, 45 has been really nice because what it does, it just lets that midfield drop back a little bit more, especially in next gen, where they just drop back just a little bit more to build numbers, behind the ball. And it also makes for some really great play in the box. A clearance can be deflected, midfielders come back to defend, headers, etc. It's just the way it should be. It's not just defenders versus attackers versus midfielders and clearing the ball, right? And so that height lets that control happen to where there's just a nice look to the setup and lets the gameplay free up just a tad, but also compress where it needs to, right? I always talk about compression and decompression, and so that's the concept here. Line length after that is at 38 for the user, 40 for the CPU. I've explained why we have this there. With 6260, I've explained that as well. Fullback positioning, we just haven't touched it, just haven't really needed to. The formations and tactics take over anyway, so there's really no point to modify this much more. Power bar user at 50, it's fine. If you do full manual, you can do it at 52. It's definitely your choice. You can do it at 62 for all I care. It really doesn't matter. It's your personal preference. First touch control error for this world-class set is 85. For the other sets, they vary, which I'll go over next. Okay, so for the harder world-class set, the real difference is in the error values. So the shot error for the user is at 65. Shot error for the CPU is different at 55, really just to make them a little bit more clinical in that respect. Pass error for the user is at 52. And pass error for the CPU is 50. Again, these are error values. These are very simple adjustments. If it's not hard enough, definitely lower this value. Feel free to do so. You can even go as far as 40, I would say. And you can also raise pass speed if you really want it, but this is kind of just where we've left it. So that's really the biggest difference with the set from the base set. So let's go into the shorter halves next. And first touch control error for the CPU is at 65. That's a really big difference from the harder world class. Basically lets them control the ball a little bit more versus letting the ball bobble up and down, etc. So that's really the end of the harder world class set. So for the shorter halves, really the difference is in shot error at 60 apiece. And again, we're not trying to make it unrealistic, but we have to compensate, for the less amount of time. So shot error is at 60 apiece, where it's still somewhat realistic. It's not like the harder, where the CPU has the advantage there. And then pass error is at 58 with the same concept as well. That's really the difference between the harder and the shorter. Is like shorter, we still want it to be realistic from the base set, but we want to allow some more opportunity to be more clinical, not by much, but still make it where you can kind of enjoy the base set and you're just more pressed for time. Now, if you really want to, you could lower those values if you'd like. It's just really up to you. Like, how much time do you have? I mean, you could even, if you really wanted to, raise run frequency, but honestly, try it out first before you make any adjustments. The shorter half set definitely makes you feel, just in general, when you play shorter halves, so I'm talking like 5 to 9 minutes or 5 to 8 minutes, whatever it is, you might feel that you're rushed no matter what. Every time I watch people that play on shorter halves, it looks like it's always the same type of play, it feels like. So honestly, you just have to kind of gauge what what you're attempting. Don't be afraid to also modify the tactics as well. If you're playing on a shorter halves, you may have to change the tactics to not be a slow build up. You may have to go to a fast build up. Okay, so next up is the legendary set. So with the legendary set, remember, a lot of values are still the same with the exception of, in this case, shot error. Shot error for the user is at 60. For the CPU, it's at 70. Same with pass error. Pass error is at 52 for the user, 70 for the CPU. Now, really, the concept of the errors here, of course, at legendary, the skills advance, ratings, the players just, the CPU players just get a lot better. They become more clinical. So naturally, the errors will increase in that respect. And so shot error at 60 for the user is a good balance of, really mishit shots to some really chances for some beautiful goals. The CPU, don't knock it with the 70. We did this video as well, in FIFA 20, and shot error value was pretty high as well. I'll tell you, there's some incredible animations that happen on high shot errors, especially with high shot speeds, now that we can do that too. After that, pass error at 52 and 70. I'll tell you honestly, pass error at 70 does feel like it's a little high, especially on the lower league teams. So lower this if you'd like. I would go probably as low as 65. Really, the lowest possible after that would be 62. But 70 is just fine. You might get it sometimes where they scuff a pass at times, but the exceptional teams, or even just like the 3-star, 4-star teams, they'll still be a challenge. But adjust this value as you'd like. But of course, going into the next set, I'll go into the harder legendary and then the shorter halves legendary. So going into the harder legendary set, really big difference here is shot error 55 at both for the user and the CPU. And that's, again, more clinical, more challenging. If you start to feel like it's unrealistic, raise the value. Pass error 52 for the user, 60 for the CPU. The exception is the first touch control, similar to the harder world class, just lowered the first touch control error. Okay, so the shorter halves legendary here, the shot error is at 60 apiece, because you still want that sense of clinical, but you also want that sense of, that it's still realistic. The misses are realistic. I'll tell you, 60, it feels like a 50 sometimes with the CPU. Pass error at 52, and 70 stays the same as it is in the base legendary set, because we're not trying to make it unrealistic, still trying to get you guys to still enjoy, even though you're playing on lower minutes, to still enjoy the way the base set works. Other than that, that's pretty much it. There's no difference in the first touch control error. Okay, so going into the ultimate set. So really, again, shot error 60. This one's a little bit different though. 80 is pretty significant, and so is pass error at 75. Now, you're playing on ultimate. It's going to be more difficult. CPU is more clinical. Raise this value to ridiculous levels because that's ridiculous difficulty. But, you know, it's kind of what you sign up for when you play on ultimate. With pass error at 52, we want the user still to have an advantage. The CPU, not so much. So 75 gets raised a bit. And I see the concept again is, you know, the different difficulties as you go higher, the errors go higher as well. The real difference after that is first touch control error, 75 for the user, and it's 85 still for the CPU. And that's really to let the user have a little bit more time on the ball, control the ball, not be frustrated, because the CPU is punishing on ultimate. But as anything, if you need to adjust the values, feel free. If it's too easy, lower the shot error, lower the pass error. Those are the two things. I just want to let you guys know, if you ever really feel like it's not hard enough, not, you know, or too easy, anything like that, the number one thing to change out of everything that I would personally recommend is acceleration. If it's too hard, raise it to 52 for the CPU, raise it to 51, even 54, 55. Could get ridiculous in some spots, but acceleration controls everything in the respect of difficulty, because the CPU gets, you know, to the ball in 50-50 situations. They, you know, take advantage of your positioning, etc. They move off the ball quicker. You're a lot slower, so your stick skills need to be a lot better. So just, you know, if you need to, raise their acceleration. If you don't care about stamina, as in stamina depletion, you can even lower the acceleration for the user. 48, 2-point slot there. 49. I wouldn't go too much lower than that, because then there's no stamina that gets depleted. So for the CPU, you can, you know, raise it. I mean, that's a 4-point gap, 48, 52. Definitely adjust that value first, acceleration first, even before you say, hey, I want to play the base sets, you know, the base legendary set, the base professional world class set, but I want it to be a lot harder. So honestly, just adjust the acceleration and you will make it harder by default by just doing that. And then you can look into these sets that are presented in depth, but it's really up to you. Again, it's sliders. You can do anything you want with them. You don't have to use the exact values that are posted here. But anyway, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, let me know with any comments, questions, anything below. If you haven't joined already, join Operation Sports. Hang out with us. You know, we have a couple rules in there, of course, to just be constructive, be respectful, because we're not customer service. We're not building these sets just for somebody. You know, we're building them for ourselves as well. So I've got a great group of testers, really some close individuals that I trust to give a second, you know, opinion, third opinion, whatever. But the community definitely prevails, and it's the base of where we start from. We know what everybody's looking for and kind of what we're trying to approach. In most cases with sliders, a lot of the time in sliders, we're trying to get to the point where, you know, we're problem solving, because with FIFA, the title updates, the concepts that they have with hypermotion, etc., and the execution. I mean, look at FIFA 21. The execution was probably the worst thing ever, with the midfielders not tracking back. And, you know, I'm told that was by design, and it was just never going to be changed. So that's just what we have to live with, right? It's unfortunate that it is that way, but it is that way. And that's just the nature of the beast. That's just what we have to do with, you know, playing a game that's not designed for us. Those of us offline your realism chasing, you know, players, because the game is built for online, Ultimate Team, Pro, you know, those guys who want that fast, twitchy gameplay, quick reaction, quick response, and playing in, you know, like 4-minute halves or whatever it is. So the game's not built for us. It's not meant for us. We're not the demographic. So making these adjustments is exactly why, you know, we have to get away from defaults. You know, a lot of people love talking about default, and, you know, a lot of people love to talk about default, especially when they're complaining about our sliders. It's just always a thing. It's always the thing that's not the Operation Sports sliders always seems to be better for people. I don't know where that started to change. There was a time when it was a lot more appreciated, but it's understandable now with everything at everybody's disposal, and of course everybody being able to make adjustments on their own. And that's not a bad thing. I do want us all to come together and play FIFA because, let's face it, in this day and age, and especially something I've kind of gone over with the channel, is PES is dead, and all we've got is PES 2021 right now. And then eFootball is terrible, and so this is kind of what we've got right now with the game, and it's really unfortunate that is the status that we live in, and where we have to rely on FIFA, where a lot of guys are FIFA guys now, even though they've been PES players for however long in their lives. This is what we have to live with, and it is the way of the world. It's the way of gaming. No need to beat the horse any further than that, but I want to thank you guys, of course, for watching the video, allowing me to explain the sliders, and let me know what you guys think. As always, there will be a title update probably in the near future, which then we'll reassess and try to figure out what we need to do next. But if, as our base set of where we started and how we've built this, I feel very happy with how this game has turned out. And especially with this title update that everybody doesn't like. So we're enjoying it. Hope you guys enjoy it. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. And as always, take care and stay tuned.